Throughout the annals of history, a chilling pattern emerges with unsettling regularity. The virtuous are often the first to fall from grace, while the ruthless ascend to the coveted throne. This stark reality ignites a persistent and deeply troubling question. Can a good person truly wield power without being consumed and ultimately undone by its inherent corrupting forces? This very conundrum lies at the heart of Machiavellian thought, a philosophy not for the faint of heart, but for those courageous enough to confront the unvarnished truth about the nature of power. In his seminal work, The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli, a seasoned Florentine diplomat and political theorist of the Renaissance, refrains from moralistic pronouncements or utopian visions. Instead, he dissects the intricate mechanisms of politics with the sharp scalpel of pragmatism, revealing the raw and often uncomfortable truths about how power truly operates. His analysis suggests that power is not sustained by inherent goodness alone, but rather by a potent blend of shrewd control and uncalculated action. For Machiavelli, while morality can serve as a useful tool in certain circumstances, it should never be considered an immutable principle upon which a ruler solely relies. Idealistic notions of power often champion the belief that justice and ethical conduct are the surest pathways to success. However, Machiavelli, drawing upon his extensive experience in the turbulent political landscape of 15th and 16th century Italy, possessed a far more nuanced and often cynical understanding of human nature. He recognized that individuals are complex beings, often driven by self-interest, prone to inconsistency, and capable of swift betrayal when their own advantages are at stake. A benevolent king might be lauded in the realm of literature and folklore, but in the harsh realities of political life, mere kindness holds little value if it is not underpinned by demonstrable strength. It is from this unflinching assessment of human nature that Machiavelli articulates his most controversial and enduring thesis: to survive and maintain dominion, a ruler must sometimes be willing to employ the most ruthless of measures. This is not a blanket endorsement of cruelty for its own sake. Rather, it is a pragmatic acknowledgement that naivety and unwavering adherence to conventional morality can be fatal in the brutal arena of power. Machiavelli does not explicitly advocate for deception and treachery as a first resort, but he also rejects the notion that absolute truthfulness is always the optimal path to preserving power. He suggests that good people can govern effectively, but only if they possess a deep and unromantic understanding of the rules of the game, a game often played with high stakes and few truly unbreakable rules. The fundamental question then becomes, are they willing and able to step onto this perilous chessboard? Machiavelli's worldview was not born in an ivory tower of abstract ideals. He came of age amidst the volatile and fragmented landscape of Renaissance Italy, where power was not bestowed by virtue but seized through bloodshed and intricate political maneuvering. The 15th century saw Italy as a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states, including Florence, Venice, Milan, and Naples, constantly vying for dominance. Within each city, relentless power struggles unfolded, with powerful families rising and falling with ruthless efficiency. From his formative years, Machiavelli witnessed betrayal as an almost predictable element of the political equation. The gentle and well-meaning were often devoured by the ambitious and unscrupulous, while the ruthless and cunning consistently managed to maintain their grip on power. Kind and just leaders frequently met tragic ends, while shrewd and sometimes tyrannical rulers often enjoyed long tenures. It was from these stark and often brutal lessons that Machiavelli concluded that traditional morality held little sway in the art of governance. Only the cold, hard realities of political effectiveness determined who survived and thrived. In this tumultuous era, one figure stood out as a chillingly effective embodiment of Machiavellian principles: Cesare Borgia. The illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI, Borgia employed every conceivable ruthless tactic to consolidate his own power and carve out a personal dominion in central Italy. His rule was characterized not only by the decisive use of military force, but also by a calculated cultivation of fear to maintain control. When necessary, Borgia did not hesitate to eliminate his rival swiftly and without remorse. Machiavelli was not an admirer of gratuitous violence, but he deeply respected its effectiveness when strategically applied. From his pragmatic perspective, rulers like Borgia were not simply malicious villains, but rather masterful players in the intricate game of power. They understood that the construction of an enduring state sometimes necessitated acts that would be deemed morally reprehensible in ordinary life, and that without a firm, even iron hand, the throne would inevitably be seized by a stronger contender. It was against this backdrop that Machiavelli developed his somewhat bitter but undeniably insightful perspective on human nature. He did not view humanity through the rose-tinted lenses of idealist philosophers like Plato or Rousseau, who posited that humans were inherently good and could be perfected through proper education. Instead, Machiavelli observed human beings as they truly were, often selfish, ungrateful, driven by avarice, and readily capable of betrayal when their self-interest was at stake. Loyalty, according to Machiavelli, was not a steadfast virtue to be relied upon, but rather a temporary and transactional agreement, lasting only as long as both parties perceived a mutual benefit. A ruler, if they wished to endure, could not afford to be naive enough to believe that mere goodwill would guarantee the unwavering allegiance of their subjects. On the contrary, Machiavelli argued that fear, when judiciously applied, was often a far more reliable and effective instrument of control. From this rather pessimistic view of human nature arises a persistent and unsettling question that continues to resonate in the realms of politics and business. If people are indeed as inherently self-serving as Machiavelli suggests, is it even worthwhile to uphold ethical principles in these competitive arenas? If a leader or entrepreneur strives to maintain their integrity, can they truly hope to survive and succeed in a world teeming with ambition and potential treachery? Or will they inevitably become easy prey for those unburdened by the constraints of conscience? Machiavelli does not explicitly declare that morality is entirely without merit or consequence. However, he issues a stark warning that those who cling to it rigidly and without strategic consideration will likely be outmaneuvered and ultimately replaced by more adaptable individuals, those willing to bend or even break the rules when necessary to protect their interests and achieve their objectives. In the high-stakes game of power, unwavering purity can become a fatal vulnerability, and the ultimate survivor is often not the most virtuous, but rather the one who possesses the clearest understanding of the true nature of human behavior and the often unspoken rules of engagement. Good people often operate under the assumption that if they act with fairness and integrity, the world will reciprocate in kind. Machiavelli, with his cold and relentlessly pragmatic intellect, exposes this belief as a potentially dangerous illusion. He reveals the uncomfortable truth that justice is not always an immutable principle, but can often be a malleable political tool, something shaped and wielded to serve the interests of the powerful. History is replete with examples of principled leaders who believed in the inherent power of justice and were ultimately betrayed by those closest to them. Julius Caesar, a figure of immense power and influence, was assassinated by senators he had trusted. Abraham Lincoln, a beacon of moral fortitude, was shot by an assassin who vehemently opposed his ideals. These tragic deaths are not merely isolated personal tragedies. They serve as stark reminders of the fragility of loyalty when self-interest or conflicting ideologies come into play. Machiavelli does not entirely dismiss the inherent value of morality in a well-functioning society. However, he vehemently insists that it cannot serve as the sole foundation upon which a ruler builds their enduring power. Through his keen observations of the political landscape, he recognized that loyalty is often a conditional commodity, lasting only as long as it provides tangible benefits to those who profess it. When circumstances shift and the perceived advantages of loyalty diminish or disappear entirely, that loyalty will often evaporate just as quickly, becoming a discarded relic of a bygone era. This is not to say that all people are inherently treacherous, but rather an acknowledgement that human beings, in their actions and motivations, are often driven more by the pursuit of their own interests than by abstract notions of ethical obligation. Therefore, a good person who aspires to maintain power cannot rely solely on a naive faith in the honesty or fairness of others. Instead, they must understand that loyalty, if it is to be sustained, must be actively cultivated and reinforced through a combination of strategic control, sometimes through the imposition of fear, and at other times through the careful distribution of benefits. So can a good person navigate the treacherous currents of power without succumbing to its corrupting influence? Machiavelli does not advise anyone to embrace cruelty or become inherently wicked. However, he unequivocally warns that naivety and a steadfast refusal to acknowledge the darker aspects of human nature are the surest paths to political downfall. A good person does not necessarily need to engage in malicious acts, but they must possess a thorough understanding of how less scrupulous individuals operate in order to avoid becoming their unwitting victim. If one chooses not to employ cunning and manipulation, they must at the very least be astute enough to recognize and evade it when it is directed towards them. This does not necessitate abandoning one's moral compass entirely, but rather learning to apply ethical principles with a degree of strategic awareness. A naive individual with a purely good heart may be easily crushed by the realities of power, but a good person armed with a pragmatic understanding of these realities will be better equipped to uphold their ideals without allowing them to become a fatal vulnerability. In a world where power and loyalty are often transactional, rooted in self-interest rather than unwavering principle, good people cannot afford to exist solely on blind faith in the inherent triumph of justice. They must cultivate the ability to observe, analyze, and act with shrewdness and foresight. The central issue is not necessarily the outright abandonment of ethical principles, but rather the judicious and timely application of those principles in a manner that ensures survival and the continued ability to do good. Otherwise, they risk not only losing their grip on power, but also forfeiting the very opportunity to enact positive change and uphold the values they cherish. Machiavelli leaves little room for ambiguity when discussing the fundamental dynamics of power. He states unequivocally that if a leader is forced to choose between being loved and being feared, it is far safer to be feared. Love, in his estimation, is a fickle and often unreliable sentiment, easily swayed by changing circumstances and the volatile emotions of individuals. In times of prosperity and favor, people will readily offer praise and support. However, when adversity strikes and self-interest dictates a different course, love can quickly dissipate, giving way to betrayal and self-preservation at any cost. Fear, on the other hand, is presented as a far more potent and enduring instrument of control. It compels obedience even when personal inclination might suggest otherwise. A ruler who relies solely on the affection of their subjects will soon discover the ephemeral nature of loyalty, but one who cultivates a healthy degree of fear can often maintain their authority even when faced with shifting tides of public opinion or political fortune. This is not to suggest that Machiavelli advocates for senseless cruelty or the indiscriminate use of violence. He does not encourage gratuitous brutality, but rather emphasizes that punishment, when necessary, must be applied strategically and purposefully. A leader does not need to incite widespread hatred and resentment, but they must be sufficiently formidable to deter anyone from seriously contemplating a challenge to their authority. Cesare Borgia serves as a prime example in Machiavelli's analysis. He ruled with an iron fist, not hesitating to eliminate those who posed a credible threat to his position. It was this calculated ruthlessness, rather than random acts of barbarity, that allowed him to maintain order and stability in his territories for a significant period. Borgia, in Machiavelli's view, was not a mindless killer, but a leader who understood that power, to be sustained, often needed to be defended at any cost. However, if fear is such an effective tool for maintaining control, is it possible for a leader to be both loved and feared simultaneously? Machiavelli acknowledges that this would be the ideal scenario, but he deems it a difficult and often unattainable balance. He suggests that the more a ruler strives to please everyone, the more vulnerable they become to being exploited or undermined. Kindness and generosity, if not coupled with a clear demonstration of strength and a willingness to enforce boundaries, can be perceived as weakness and readily taken advantage of. Conversely, a shrewd leader might skillfully employ both elements, cultivating fear among potential adversaries while still maintaining the loyalty and support of their core constituents. They do not necessarily need to be universally adored, but they must be respected and perhaps even a little dreaded by those who might harbor ambitions to usurp their power. So when should a good person in a position of leadership be prepared to embrace ruthlessness? Machiavelli's answer, though perhaps unsettling to some, is clear. When the very foundations of their power are threatened, and when excessive leniency might lead to their ultimate downfall, and the subsequent instability of the state. A wise leader understands the critical distinction between necessary firmness and gratuitous cruelty, knowing when to administer punishment decisively and when to extend clemency judiciously. Punishment, when executed swiftly, justly, and with a clear purpose, can serve as a powerful deterrent, maintaining order and quashing potential rebellions before they gain momentum. A compelling modern example, though not explicitly cited by Machiavelli, might be found in the actions of Winston Churchill during World War II. To protect the vital secret of the Enigma code-breaking efforts, a crucial weapon in the Allied arsenal, he reportedly allowed a German bombing raid on Coventry to proceed without specific warning, as revealing the intelligence might have alerted the enemy to their compromised codes. Was this a ruthless decision? Arguably, yes. But the potential consequence of revealing the secret, prolonging the war and potentially costing millions more lives, arguably justified the difficult choice in the eyes of those responsible for the greater good. In the high-stakes arenas of politics and war, such agonizing decisions, balancing immediate moral concerns against potentially catastrophic long-term consequences, are sometimes deemed necessary to safeguard a larger objective. This brings us to the delicate and often contentious boundary between traditional morality and the harsh realities of governance. When, if ever, is it justifiable to commit an act that might be considered morally wrong in order to achieve a greater good or prevent a greater harm? Machiavelli does not provide a simplistic or universally applicable answer to this profound ethical dilemma. However, he strongly emphasizes that a leader cannot afford to be paralyzed by rigid adherence to idealistic moral principles when the security and stability of the state are at stake. In the context of maintaining power, traditional morality alone cannot guarantee the survival of a regime. Only a combination of strength, strategic acumen, and a willingness to act decisively, even if those actions might be perceived as morally ambiguous, can truly secure the throne. If a good person desires to maintain their leadership and enact positive change, they must understand that there will be times when compassion and leniency must give way to resolute action, and that sometimes, to protect the greater good, they might be compelled to employ methods that others might deem harsh or even cruel. Power, in its essence, is a double-edged sword. In the hands of a capable and responsible leader, it can be a potent instrument for creation, order, and the advancement of the common good. However, it also possesses the inherent potential to corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals, dragging them into a destructive cycle of moral compromise and eventual tyranny. Machiavelli keenly understood that few individuals enter the realm of politics with the explicit intention of becoming a despot. Rather, it is the insidious nature of unchecked power itself that can gradually transform a once principled person into someone unrecognizable, someone willing to commit increasingly reprehensible acts to maintain their position. While Machiavelli acknowledges the necessity of power for the stability of a nation, he also issues a crucial warning. A leader must cultivate and maintain a strong sense of internal discipline and ethical grounding to prevent the seductive allure of absolute power from completely overwhelming their moral compass. According to Machiavelli, the ultimate objective should not be the mere accumulation or display of power, but rather the strategic and responsible use of that power. It should not become an end in itself, but rather a means to achieve legitimate goals, such as the security and well-being of the state and its people. A truly effective leader is not consumed by an insatiable lust for domination, but understands the importance of setting boundaries, knowing when to exercise restraint, and recognizing when to press forward with decisive action. Never allow power to control you. Instead, be the one who controls power. This perhaps encapsulates one of the most critical lessons embedded within Machiavelli's seemingly cynical philosophy. Can a good person wield power and still retain their essential goodness? The answer, according to Machiavelli's implicit guidance, lies in unwavering vigilance and self-awareness. Power only becomes truly dangerous when it morphs into an all-consuming passion, when the individual wielding it loses sight of ethical boundaries and the potential for abuse. A leader might, on occasion, need to act ruthlessly, but if they allow ruthlessness to become the defining characteristic of their rule, they will quickly erode their legitimacy and ultimately sow the seeds of their own downfall. Machiavelli never explicitly encourages a leader to abandon all moral considerations. Instead, he urges them to apply morality with a keen sense of realism and strategic awareness. Ethical principles should not be viewed as rigid chains that completely bind the exercise of power, but neither should they be carelessly discarded as irrelevant. The wise and effective leader is the one who possesses the discernment to know when adhering to idealistic principles serves the greater good, and when a degree of flexibility and even calculated deviation is necessary to protect the fundamental interests of the state and their own ability to govern. It is precisely this capacity for strategic flexibility that often determines who endures and thrives in the unforgiving arena of political power. Machiavelli held little faith in rigidly ideological leaders, as history had repeatedly demonstrated that those unwilling or unable to adapt to changing circumstances were quickly swept aside by the relentless currents of political change. A king or president who remains stubbornly wedded to a single, unyielding ideology, while ignoring the evolving realities on the ground, will easily become a puppet of circumstance, manipulated by those more adaptable and opportunistic. Conversely, leaders who possess the agility to adjust their strategies, to embrace necessary changes when the situation demands it, are far more likely to weather political storms and maintain their authority over the long term. In the modern business world, we see echoes of this principle in companies like Apple or Amazon, which have never remained rigidly attached to a single business model, but have constantly reinvented themselves to adapt to market shifts and embrace emerging trends. A successful leader, whether in politics or business, needs to cultivate a similar mindset, constantly observing, adjusting, and being willing to shed outdated approaches in favor of those that are more effective in the current environment. But if a leader is constantly shifting strategies to adapt to evolving circumstances, does their underlying set of ethical principles retain any meaningful value? This is a complex question that has been debated by philosophers and political thinkers for centuries. Some argue that excessive flexibility can lead to a slippery slope, transforming a leader into a mere opportunist who abandons their core values in pursuit of power. However, Machiavelli would likely counter that true ethical leadership lies not in the blind and unwavering adherence to a fixed set of ideals, but rather in the intelligent and strategic application of those ideals in a way that ensures the long-term survival and flourishing of the state. If a leader makes difficult choices and adapts their approach to safeguard the greater good, and their ability to continue leading effectively, then such adaptation is not necessarily a betrayal of principle, but rather a pragmatic element of navigating the complex and often morally ambiguous terrain of power. Ethics, like politics itself, is not a static and unyielding monolith, but rather a dynamic and evolving force. It must be sufficiently adaptable to navigate the complexities of the real world, yet also possess the underlying strength to avoid being completely swept away by the tides of expediency. If Niccolò Machiavelli were alive in the modern world, it is unlikely that he would be particularly surprised by the state of contemporary affairs. Despite the passage of centuries and the profound transformations in technology and social structures, the fundamental principles governing politics, business, and even interpersonal relationships often continue to operate along the lines he so astutely identified in his writings. Those who truly wield influence and control are often not the naively virtuous who blindly trust in absolute fairness, but rather those who possess a clear-eyed understanding of how human beings actually behave, particularly when their interests are on the line. In the various power struggles that unfold in the political arena, the corporate boardroom, and even in everyday social interactions, loyalty often remains a conditional commodity, contingent upon perceived benefit. And ethical considerations can sometimes be bent or rationalized when the pursuit of power becomes the ultimate objective. What advice might Machiavelli offer to those navigating the complexities of our modern world? It would likely not be a call to abandon all ethical principles and embrace ruthless ambition. Instead, he would likely emphasize the crucial importance of developing a keen ability to read people and understand their underlying motivations. Not everyone who professes to be virtuous is truly so, and not everyone who smiles and offers apparent support is a genuine ally. A wise leader, or indeed anyone seeking to navigate the complexities of human interaction, should not judge individuals solely on their words or outward appearances, but rather on their actions, particularly when their self-interest is challenged or threatened. We live in an era where the cultivation of personal image and the art of persuasive rhetoric are highly valued, and where superficial charm can often mask deeper, less altruistic intentions. Machiavelli would likely remind us that in the game of power, outward appearances are far less important than the genuine motivations and potential for betrayal that lie beneath the surface. Anyone who wishes to survive and thrive without being constantly manipulated must cultivate the ability to observe carefully, to discern who their true allies are, and to identify those who might be merely waiting for an opportune moment to advance their own interests at their expense. However, perhaps the most crucial piece of advice Machiavelli would impart is this: understand the game, but do not allow it to completely control you. Developing a strategic understanding of how power operates and learning how to navigate its complexities does not necessarily mean becoming a cynical or ruthless individual. One can learn to protect oneself, to avoid being exploited or taken advantage of, without completely abandoning one's own inherent sense of morality and integrity. If there is one overarching lesson to be gleaned from Machiavelli's often misunderstood philosophy, it is that possessing a clear-eyed understanding of the realities of power does not inherently transform you into a monster. It merely equips you with the knowledge necessary to avoid becoming easy prey. So how can one effectively apply Machiavellian, strategic thinking while still retaining one's fundamental goodness and ethical compass? The answer, according to the spirit of Machiavelli's work, lies not in the outright rejection of morality, but rather in the intelligent and discerning application of ethical principles in a world that is often far from ideal. A good person does not necessarily need to become a master of manipulation and deceit, but they cannot afford to be naive or willfully ignorant of the darker aspects of human behavior and the potential for exploitation. They can strive to uphold their values, but they must also be vigilant in ensuring that those values do not become vulnerabilities that can be readily exploited by others. Machiavelli would likely not encourage anyone to abandon their moral convictions entirely, but he would certainly advise that those convictions must serve the cause of survival and the ability to continue doing good in the long run, rather than leading one down a path of predictable failure and disillusionment. In an imperfect world, perhaps the most effective way to live ethically is to possess a clear and realistic understanding of the world's true nature, both its potential for good and its undeniable capacity for self-interest and even ruthlessness. Can a good person navigate life and leadership without ever engaging with the often uncomfortable truths presented by Machiavelli? Perhaps, but they must be prepared to face a world that is often fraught with hidden dangers and potential betrayals. In a world where those driven by self-interest and ambition often hold significant sway, individuals who are excessively trusting or rigidly adhere to idealistic notions of fairness may find themselves repeatedly manipulated, betrayed, and ultimately defeated. However, this does not necessitate a wholesale embrace of cynicism or a descent into ruthlessness. Engaging with Machiavellian thought is not an endorsement of abandoning one's moral compass, but rather a call to develop a more sophisticated understanding of how to protect oneself and one's values in a world that is not always governed by pure intentions. Politics, business, and even our personal relationships often operate according to underlying power dynamics that Machiavelli so vividly illuminated. If you remain ignorant of these dynamics, you risk becoming a mere pawn in someone else's game. But does an understanding of power inevitably lead to a cold and calculating detachment from human connection and empathy? Not necessarily. Intelligence and strategic thinking do not inherently equate to heartlessness, and a realistic assessment of human nature does not automatically necessitate betrayal or exploitation. Machiavelli did not demand that everyone become a tyrant, but rather advised that if you wish to protect what you hold dear and achieve meaningful goals, you must possess the wisdom to know when to be flexible and when to stand firm, when to extend trust and when to exercise caution. Selectively incorporating the most insightful and pragmatic elements of Machiavellian thought can empower you to become a more effective and resilient leader, one who is neither naive nor unnecessarily cruel, but grounded in a realistic understanding of the world and the people within it. Because ultimately, you don't need to become a monster to survive, but you must understand how monsters operate to avoid becoming their next victim. If you found this exploration of Machiavelli's insights into power and how good people can navigate its complexities thought-provoking, we encourage you to show your support. Understanding these often dark but undeniably honest truths is crucial for anyone seeking to make a positive impact in the world. So, if you appreciated this dive into the art of power, please give this video a like. To stay updated with more content that delves into philosophy, leadership, and the realities of human nature, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Your engagement helps us bring these important discussions to a wider audience. Thanks for watching.